What would you do if you were viciously attacked by Harvard liberals who wanted to shut down your event after being asked to speak at Harvard? Stay tuned for this week's TGIF at Work podcast, Facing the Giants at Harvard.
How do I bring my faith to work? How do I tap into the power of God in my work-life call? Why am I going through this adversity? Is God mad at me? I'm Oz Hillman, and I've been helping leaders like you answer these questions and more for over 30 years. That's what this podcast is all about. Let's learn and grow together. Welcome to TGIF, Today God is First.
Welcome to this week's TGIF at Work podcast. This week I want to share a story about culture influence. In 2011, myself and Lance Wallnow and 8 others were invited to speak at a conference on Harvard. And the man who invited us was a graduate student. And strangely enough, he hosted debate events at Harvard. And it would turn out that his expertise and his spiritual backbone helped us fight many who opposed us. So when we were first announced that we were having a conference at Harvard on community transformation, within 1 week, many of us who were the speakers began to get calls and emails from friends and associates saying, "Did you really say that?" And we were all caught off guard and we didn't know what was going on. And then we found out that the minute that we were announced that we were coming to Harvard, the gays and Muslims on campus didn't want us to come. They said, "We don't want these right-wing religious bigots on our campus." And they went to the dean to try and shut it down, and they started spreading lies about us. And the local paper, Harvard paper, wrote things about us, and I read things about me I had no idea I was involved in. And so it was quite a thing. And so the man who was hosting us, he went to the dean and he defended all of us and said all of those reports were not true. And so we were able to host the event. Now, once we decided to host the event, we decided to do a pre-trip to the place where we were going to have the meeting, and they allowed us to go into the room where the presentations were going to be made, the conference facility, and the area where the common area where coffee and refreshments would be had. And so we had a team of intercessors, and we prayed over every chair. We prayed over every part of the facility and asked God to protect us and allow us to be successful in what we were doing. And we would learn later how important that day of prayer was to our event. So the day came, and all of a sudden, we have 50 protesters out front, and they are walking up and down. They're yelling things about us, and I have a placard with my name on it, and they're accusing me of being anti-gay with some legislation that was in Uganda. Well, it turned out I was in Uganda, but I had nothing to do with that legislation. And my daughter had gone on that trip with us, and she decided to go out and walk around the protesters. And in fact, she came up to the man who was carrying the placard that had my name on it and asked him, "Do you know this man?" He says, "Oh yeah, he's anti-gay guy. He fought for legislation in Uganda." And she said, "Really?" And so she never revealed who she was, but she just let him talk. And so we end up having the event, and I'm reminded of a scripture verse out of 1 Corinthians 16:9. Paul says, "Because a great door for effective work has opened to me, and there are many who oppose me." You see, Paul understood there were certain demons that were more prominent over areas of influence than other areas, and he understood there would be warfare. And so we end up having the event, And as you can see, the protesters were out front, and uh, it was really quite amazing. And during the event, the gays and Muslims who were students, they were allowed in our coffee area because they are students, so they could have attended the event themselves. And we learned that we had witches attend our event. And anyway, so one of the protesters had actually come from upstairs and down to our area, and the minute he put his foot on the floor where we were, he screamed. He said, "What is that?" Well, the Holy Spirit had impacted him, and there was warfare going over us in such a way that it was tangible by those who were opposing us. And so it was quite an event. So we had the event, and so while we were milling around in the coffee area, several of the protesters were in the coffee area. And Lance and I were standing there, and we said, it would really be nice just to hear these guys, why they're so opposed to us. And so he said, let's see if we can have a little time together with them. And so there was like 5 of them. And we asked them, would you be willing to sit with us and let us hear what your concerns are? And there happened to be a professor there from Harvard, and we asked him if he would sit in on it. And so we went into a side room, and we began to hear their grievances. And the one man who had spread all the lies about me was there in the meeting, and he turned his words toward me and says, you opposed the anti-gay legislation. You were for that anti-gay legislation in Uganda. And I said, well, would you like to know the real truth about that? And he said, what do you mean? And I said, well, I've been to Uganda, but I was in Uganda before that legislation had ever come. And the person that was part of that, I did know him. He was a pastor, but I would never be supportive of that type of legislation. He said, really? And I said, yeah. And he says, I've wrongfully judged you, haven't I? And I said, yeah, you have. Would you like me to publish a retraction in the Harvard paper? And I said, hey, that would be wonderful. I would appreciate that. And so we told them, we said, tell us what's on your mind. What concerns you about what we're doing here? And so they started accusing this and that, and we corrected them where they were. And one of the things we did that I'll never forget was so effective is that we listened to them. We allowed them to talk. We didn't trigger. We didn't, say things back to them. We just tried to give them clarity about what they were talking about and what they were accusing us of. And so this went on for quite some time. And by the end of the meeting, we had, established a rapport with them. And strangely, the Harvard professor turned to all of them and said, gentlemen, I just sat through this entire day's conference, and they never brought up you one time, and they've never accused you of anything. And we would be glad to have a conference like this anytime at Harvard. You have wrongfully judged them. And so that was quite a statement. And so as a result of the conference, I learned 6 important principles about dealing with people in adversarial situations. The first thing I learned is advanced prayer was very important to our meeting. The spiritual warfare that was over the meeting was intense, and so we had a team that went beforehand. Also, I learned that you don't be triggered by their accusations, and you don't throw back things at them and get into a fight with them verbally. We listened and we clarified by asking questions. Number 3 is that we engaged in dialogue without attacking them as people. only the ideas that were expressed, and giving clarity and asking questions about their views. Number 4 is we stood firm when efforts were made to shut us down. We used authorities to appeal to our case, and we appealed to the dean, and the dean agreed with us. We had an Apostle Paul type person who was a graduate student who defended us and went before the dean and was really our advocate. And he had, as I say, hosted debate events at Harvard. So we had a really good person representing us. Number 5 is we met to discuss the issues, and we had a moderator who had the authority to intervene. And this was the Harvard professor. And so by having him there, it gave us a lot more protection in the whole event. And number 6 is that we built relational bridges without judgment with these leaders. In fact, we ended up going out to the bar that night and spending time with these leaders and answering their questions. And one of them Lance gave him a C.S. Lewis book, and he managed the bar there in town at Harvard. And so we built bridges with them, and it was a fantastic thing. We also found that we had witches in attendance. We had some prayer meetings that were going on where we would offer to pray individually for people that were at the event. And some of our people were very prophetic. And so we found out some of the people that asked for prayer were witches. And our prophetic people gave them prophetic words. And during the debrief at the end of the conference, where we had everybody tell us their comments about the event, one of the witches stood up and said, "I really enjoyed it. You guys hear better than I do." And that was an amazing thing. And so, as I said, the professor defended us. And so the opinion of the gays and Muslims changed as a result of our engagement with them. And they said, "You guys are nothing like what we thought you'd be," because they were calling us right-wing political bigots. So as a result of just building the bridge, listening to them and not getting angry and throwing things back at them, we created a bridge. And so I want to encourage you, if you're involved in culture reaching initiatives, take these 6 things to mind and learn from them, and maybe they'll be helpful to you as you be salt and light in your community or any event that might be political or whatever it is where you're up against spiritual principalities in cities and nations. So I hope this is helpful to you. God bless. Take care.